The library had stood abandoned for decades, its grand doors locked and forgotten. Vines crawled across the stone facade, windows caked in dust, and the once proud sign above the entrance was cracked and peeling. Even from outside, I could feel the weight of the place, a stillness so heavy it pressed against my chest, like the air itself had been frozen. I pushed open the heavy front doors. They groaned, protesting after years of neglect. Dust swirled in the weak sunlight filtering through the cracked windows. The smell hit me immediately, aged paper, mildew, and something faintly metallic. It was familiar and terrifying all at once, as if the library itself exhaled decades of trapped knowledge. I stepped inside. The main hall stretched before me, rows upon rows of shelves packed with books that should have fallen into ruin years ago. Instead, they stood neatly aligned, untouched by time, or so it seemed. My footsteps echoed, loud and intrusive, disturbing the silence. And then it started. A book slid off a shelf on its own. I froze. It landed with a soft thud, pages fluttering like wings. My flashlight beam cut across the aisle. The shelf above it rattled slightly, as if something moved within. Another book fell, then another. Slowly at first, almost shyly, then with more force, as if the library was aware of my presence and was testing me. I tried to convince myself it was gravity, or the building settling, but the pattern was deliberate. Books fell from different aisles, seemingly guided by some unseen hand. Some thudded gently onto the floor, others crashed with enough force to make me jump. The whispers came next. Faint at first, just the rustle of pages, then slowly forming words. Read, read, follow. They seemed to come from all directions at once, bouncing off the walls, echoing through the high ceiling. I turned, scanning the shadowed corners. Empty. Yet the library seemed alive, breathing, aware, reacting to my presence. I walked down a narrow aisle, and a heavy tome floated toward me, hovering in midair. I reached out instinctively. It landed gently in my hands, pages flipping open to a chapter one couldn't understand. I dropped it in shock, and it hovered a moment before slowly returning to the shelf. Every step I took seemed to trigger movement. Shelves shifted slightly, aisles lengthened or narrowed, books shuffled without contact. It was as if the library had its own mind, a living entity that rearranged itself, guiding or misleading intruders. In the reading room, I discovered more. Chairs slid back slightly, desks creaked, and books flew onto tables as though invisible readers had been interrupted mid-study. Shadows flickered across the walls, elongated by the weak sunlight, forming shapes that resembled figures hunched over the texts. I thought I saw eyes in the corners, staring, waiting. A staircase led to the upper gallery. I climbed it cautiously. Bookshelves lined the balcony, old leather-bound volumes stacked precariously. I noticed one in particular, a thick, ancient-looking book with a cracked spine. As I approached, it slowly opened on its own, pages flipping rapidly. Words in a language I didn't recognize glowed faintly on the paper before fading into blank pages. I felt a sudden chill. The library's whispers grew louder, layered, almost pleading. Read, stay, understand. The floating book dropped silently, and I stumbled back. Another shelf shifted violently, sending books tumbling in a cascade of paper and ink. I shielded my face, my heart hammering. In the center of the gallery, a massive chandelier swayed, though there was no draft. Dust fell like snow, catching the beam of my flashlight. The air vibrated, faint hums rising from the shelves themselves. The library wasn't just moving, it was communicating. Reacting. Watching. I descended back to the main hall, keeping my eyes on the aisles. Each one seemed alive, stretching and twisting, filled with books that moved subtly, almost imperceptibly. Some fell, some shifted, others hovered as if inviting me to approach. I realized then, the library wanted me to engage with it, to notice, to read, to interact. But it also seemed to punish hesitation, throwing books in warning, slamming doors softly behind me. A distant noise came from the far corner, a sliding door opening slowly. I approached, and the books in the adjacent shelves moved slightly, as if nudged by invisible fingers. The room beyond was dark, filled with stacked volumes reaching the ceiling. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me with a soft click. Inside, the books shifted again, forming a path deeper into the shadows. The whispers intensified. Follow, uncover. No, I followed, flashlight in hand, the sound of moving paper echoing around me, the air growing colder and heavier. And then I stopped. Ahead, a single book floated, glowing faintly, hovering in midair at eye level. Its pages flipped rapidly. As I stepped closer, I realized the words on the page were written in my handwriting. My own thoughts, recorded decades ago, though I had never been here before. My heart raced. The library didn't just move books, it reached into memory, pulling the visitor into its realm, drawing secrets and thoughts into the floating pages. I stepped back. A bookshelf rattled violently, sending books clattering to the floor. The whispers rose into a crescendo. Read, stay, join us. The floating book hovered closer, almost as if it wanted me to touch it, to open it, to become part of the library's living memory. I stumbled out of the room, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The library wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, aware, and it had noticed me. Every shadow, every floating book, every whisper was evidence of its sentience, guiding and testing intruders. I paused at the main hall, looking around. The shelves moved subtly now, aligning themselves neatly again, as if nothing had happened. But the faint glow of floating books remained, scattered across aisles, inviting me deeper, teasing me, promising knowledge, and something far more sinister. The deeper I walked into the library, the heavier the air became. Dust hung thick, motes swirling in the beams of my flashlight. Every shelf I passed seemed to react to my presence, books shifting slightly, whispering softly as pages rustled. The whispers were no longer gentle, forming fragmented words: read, follow, understand. I approached a long row of shelves in the center of the hall. A single book rose from the topmost shelf, hovering in midair. Its pages flipped rapidly, forming sentences I could almost comprehend. Shadows along the walls stretched unnaturally, twisting as though the very architecture was alive. Every step I took was mirrored by a faint echo of movement behind me, but no one was there. A staircase led to a higher gallery, and I ascended cautiously. Here, the shelves were taller, books stacked precariously. I noticed a leather-bound tome glowing faintly on a pedestal. As I approached, the whispers intensified. Open, see, no. I reached out. The book flipped open before my fingers touched it. Its pages revealed glimpses of my own past, events I hadn't recalled in years. I stepped back, shaken. Suddenly, the bookshelves along the gallery shifted violently. A cascade of books tumbled to the floor, some hovering midair before landing, as if the library itself was testing me, pushing me toward understanding, or punishing hesitation. Shadows formed behind the stacks, humanoid shapes leaning over the books, faceless but watching, waiting. I moved down a narrow aisle. Every step seemed heavier, the floorboards creaking as though groaning under some unseen weight. A book hovered beside me, glowing faintly, flipping through pages rapidly. The words formed sentences in my own handwriting, thoughts I had never written, memories I didn't know I had. The library was reaching into me, intertwining with my mind. A distant thud echoed through the hall. I spun around. A row of bookshelves moved slowly, creating a new passage I hadn't seen before. Light flickered in the distance, another room. I felt compelled to enter, drawn toward the glow and the whispers that now seemed urgent. Come, learn, stay. Inside, the room was smaller, walls lined with books from floor to ceiling. A chandelier swayed gently, though no breeze existed. Books floated in midair, rearranging themselves, forming words and patterns I couldn't quite comprehend. The shadows were thicker here, reaching out from corners, creeping along shelves, twisting toward me. I approached the center of the room. A single tome hovered at eye level. Its pages flipped rapidly, showing visions of people who had once entered the library, trapped within the floating books, their eyes wide with fear, mouths frozen mid-scream. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The whispers now became shouts: read, join, stay forever. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet. Shadows lengthened, creeping along walls and ceiling, moving in unnatural ways. The books shifted violently, some hitting the floor with loud thuds, others hovering like spectral guides. The library was no longer just alive, it was asserting itself, a sentient maze of knowledge and dread. I backed toward the door, but the room had changed. Walls shifted subtly, narrowing the passage. The floating book in the center of the room rose higher, pages turning faster, words glowing brighter. The whispers became almost unbearable. Do not leave, do not ignore, join us. A sudden gust of wind, or something like it, rushed through the room. Dust and papers swirled around me, books levitating violently. Shadows twisted into humanoid shapes, some faceless, some with faint grins. They moved toward me, silent but purposeful. The library wanted me to interact, to read, to understand its secrets, or perhaps to become part of it. I darted back to the hallway. Books cascaded from shelves as I passed, some floating and shifting, others crashing to the floor. The whispers followed, echoing, read, stay, no. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy with the weight of knowledge and the presence of countless souls trapped within the library's grasp. I reached a larger hall, and the ceiling seemed impossibly high. Bookshelves stretched upward beyond sight. The floating books formed a corridor of glowing pages, leading toward a distant, shadowed doorway. The whispers grew louder, pleading and commanding, enter, see, become one with the library. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to escape, but the library's pull was magnetic, irresistible. Shadows clustered around the floating books, moving and twisting, creating humanoid forms, pointing toward the doorway. The whispers became almost a chant. Time is here, knowledge is yours, stay. I stepped forward, following the glowing corridor. Books brushed against my arms, their pages warm, almost alive. I felt memories, thoughts, and knowledge I had never known brushing against my mind, overwhelming and intoxicating. The library was feeding on me, connecting, teaching, and perhaps trapping me. At the doorway ahead, the shadows condensed into a single, humanoid figure. Faceless, but commanding. A book hovered in front of it, pages flipping slowly. I realized the figure represented the library itself, a sentient guardian of knowledge, ensuring that every visitor either learned, participated, or became part of its eternal story. I took a deep breath. Every shadow, every floating book, every whispered word urged me to step inside, to confront the library fully. The room beyond promised understanding and danger. My pulse raced, the air thick with the scent of old paper and cold stone. The library had shown me its power, its awareness, and now it demanded that I make a choice. Underscore 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 underscore. I stepped through the shadowed doorway. The room beyond was vast, impossibly tall, filled with books stacked in spiraling towers that disappeared into darkness above. Floating tomes hovered in clusters, pages flipping as if caught in a silent wind. Shadows moved independently, weaving between the shelves like living threads, shaping the very air around me. In the center of the room hovered a single massive book. Its cover was blackened and cracked, yet it glowed faintly from within. The whispers swelled, urgent and layered, echoing all around. Read, know, join us, stay. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I realized this was the library's core, the essence of its consciousness, its guardian of knowledge and of souls. As I approached, the shadows surged. They weren't malicious, not entirely. But they were purposeful, guiding me toward the floating tome. I hesitated. My instincts screamed to flee, but a strange compulsion drew me closer. The whispers turned almost pleading, understand, accept, become part of us. I reached out, fingers trembling. The moment I touched the book, a shock ran through me. Memories, knowledge, and emotions that weren't mine flooded my mind. Faces of past visitors flashed across the pages, eyes wide with awe or terror. The library had absorbed them, and now it was offering me the same, insight beyond comprehension, but at a cost. Books tumbled around me, forming walls of paper that shifted constantly, creating a labyrinth. Shadows reached toward me, brushing my arms and legs, connecting with my thoughts. I realized then, the library didn't just move books. It moved memories, minds, and souls. It could peer into you, pull your past, and rewrite your perception of reality. The floating tome opened, revealing pages filled with my own handwriting. I hadn't written these words. They were my thoughts, fears, and dreams, captured in ink and preserved by the library's eerie power. The realization hit me, the library didn't just observe. It consumed and reflected, drawing its visitors into its eternal narrative. Suddenly, a shadow lunged from the corner, materializing into a human-like form. It pointed to the nearest exit, silently urging me. I took a step back. Another shadow followed, then another. The whispers rose into a crescendo: choose, leave, join, stay. The library was testing me, offering both freedom and eternal immersion. I ran toward the nearest archway, dodging floating books and shifting shelves. The shadows twisted around me but did not touch. The whispers chased me, soft and urgent, yet guiding. Outside, I could glimpse faint light through cracked windows. The exit was close, yet the library's presence was suffocating, pressing against my mind, urging me to linger. I burst through the doors into the main hall. The floating books scattered, some returning to shelves, others hovering for a fleeting moment as if bidding farewell. The whispers faded but lingered like echoes. Remember, return, time stands still. I sprinted across the dusty floorboards, heart racing, lungs burning. The front doors loomed ahead, sun spilling through cracks in the broken glass. I pushed them open and stumbled outside. The air smelled of grass and decay, warm and real. The library stood silently behind me, grand yet decayed, still and imposing. No doors moved. No books floated. No whispers called. It was patient, waiting for the next visitor, for the next mind to tempt. I turned back one last time. The building looked ordinary, abandoned, and quiet, but I knew better. I had felt its intelligence, its awareness, its hunger. It didn't just contain books. It contained the stories of every person who had dared enter. And now, I was part of that story, a living memory within its walls, even from outside. Even days later, I sense its pull. Shelves in my own home seem heavier. The rustle of pages echoes in my dreams. Faint whispers brush against the edge of consciousness. The library had left a mark, a connection that time and distance could not sever. So if you ever find yourself before an abandoned library, doors chained but windows cracked, books stacked in endless aisles, heed this warning: do not linger. Do not wander inside. Listen for the faint whispers, for the pages moving without hands, for the shadows that watch. The library is patient. Time may seem normal outside, but inside, it moves differently. Forever. If this story sent chills down your spine, like, share, and subscribe for more abandoned places, haunted libraries, and tales where the books themselves have minds, and where some knowledge comes at a terrifying price.